recording.
And you have to show yourself too, tell them.
How?
Just walk in front of them.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Affirmative action. Are we ending racism or are we prolonging it? The term affirmative action includes a broad range of policies and practices designed to promote equality in ways not strictly required by law. This is published by the California Law Review. The term affirmative action originated in the United States and first appeared in President John F. Kennedy's Executive Order number 10925. The term was used to refer to measures to achieve non-discrimination. In 1965, President Lyndon Johnson issued Executive Order number 11246, which required federal contractors to take affirmative action to hire without regard to race, religion, or national origin. In 1968, gender was added to the anti-discrimination list. This is according to the West Encyclopedia of Law. Affirmative action started out as a very noble cause, but has since become a tool that aids the practice of racism. When affirmative action was created, racism was very prevalent against African Americans and against women, but it has since intensely declined. Affirmative action has now grown to be nothing more than reverse discrimination. Now, instead of the reasoning behind affirmative action being to make things equal, a new justification is offered: to spread diversity. These two things differ greatly in that to make things equal is to hire or accept someone based on their worth or their qualifications and disregarding their race. Spreading diversity, though, is simply having certain quotas to fill or certain points that you need to match for each different race or group of people. Here are some cases of reverse discrimination, affirmative action. Grutter versus Bollinger and Gratz versus Bollinger. These are two cases against the University of Michigan for using an unfair point system to accept students. On a 150-point scale, African Americans and Hispanic students automatically receive 20 points right off the bat just for their race. Robert Lerner did a study, and his data collection shows that at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, the average white admittee scored 230 points higher on the combined SAT out of a possible 1,600 points, 6 points higher on the ACT out of a possible 36 points, and nearly half a point higher on grades on a 4-point grade scale than the average black admittee. This was entered into evidence for that court case. In a 5-4 decision involving the University of Michigan School of Law, the United States Supreme Court upheld the flexible consideration of race as one of many factors among admissions to public institutions of higher education. This is from the Supreme Court online at Duke Law. This is highly unethical and goes to show that students were and still are accepted based not on their merit, not on their qualifications or their grades, but on their race. The fact that simply for race you can receive 20 extra points right off the bat is racist. Another case here in Houston that ABC 13 recently aired, KTRK, they did a story on affirmative action spending here in Houston, and you'd be shocked at what they found. Reporter says, drive south on the Kemah Bridge and look to your right. It's hard not to notice an 11,000 square foot mansion. The property appraises at about $2 million. Do the owners look like they need affirmative action help from Houston City Hall? Well, they got it, to the tune of $12 million. When the city affirmative action director was asked if she thought it was fair that people with mansions be receiving affirmative action contracts, she replied, "I believe it's fair if they are qualified to participate in the program." What do said people have to do to receive these contracts and participate in the program? When KTRK was asked this, the reporter replied, "For 22 years, Houston City Hall has used affirmative action to make sure qualified minority and women-owned companies get a piece of the pie. Minority contractors wanting city business only have to make a good faith pledge that a percentage of the work will go there." A third case, and the final case that we're going to look at today, was a recent case, Ritchie versus DeStefano. In 2009, a group of white firefighters presented the U.S. Supreme Court with a case against the New Haven, Connecticut, the city of New Haven, Connecticut. They felt discriminated against in 2003 when the city threw out a test that white firefighters passed at a 50% greater rate than blacks. Because performance on this test was the basis for promotion, none of the blacks in the department would have advanced if the city would have accepted the results of the test. While this prevented racism issues by not creating less jobs or less promotions for the black firefighters, it created a racism issue in not promoting the white firefighters, even though they clearly showed that they deserved it, because it would have created an uproar in the community with the black firefighters. Have you all heard enough about this outdated practice? Well, affirmative action, when it was put into place in 1960s and 70s, was a very useful thing, and it did help a lot of people get jobs that they rightly deserved. It was to ensure equality in the hiring and the school acceptance practice for blacks and for women primarily, but it has now morphed into a different sort of racism, a practice that uses points and quotas to accept a certain number of people for each race, and this in itself is racism. Are there any questions?
Yeah. Do you really believe that affirmative action did help?
I think that it did when it was created. There were several, cases where there were black people that didn't get hired. Their scores weren't even looked at. They, didn't even get an interview for certain jobs simply because of the fact that they were black. And by putting affirmative action into place, I believe that it did rule out a lot of that. During that time period, though, the country was dealing with a lot of racism issues, desegregating schools and many things like that, the issues with the public transportation, and that is no longer an issue. That has all been, eliminated. Therefore, affirmative action and saying that just because, there needs to be X number of black people or X number of Hispanic people at a certain job or school, a more qualified white or Asian person doesn't get that job because there's already too many of that race, makes this practice very outdated.
I agree.
Yeah, it's,
I agree 20 years ago.
I don't know, there were a lot of cases when it went on back then, even that I don't think people should have been hired because they didn't look at scores and everything.
Well, I don't think that, somebody should be hired just because they're black, or just, or just because they're white, or not hired just because they're black, or not hired just because they're white. I think that in any job application process, or any school acceptance practice, it needs to be based on the true qualifications of the person, irregardless of what color they are, how old they are, or anything else. It depends on what job they're doing and how qualified they are to do it, or the school that they're trying to be accepted to, the program that they're trying to get admittance to, how qualified they are, what they've done in high school and what their test scores show. It shouldn't have anything to do with race or anything else. So next time you are filling out a job application or something for a school admission, I always leave the race blank, because that shouldn't have anything to do with the fact of whether or not I get selected.
Do you feel that it has crippled a part of society to depend on that?
Absolutely, I do. There's, it's in school today, there's people who get scholarships and everything else who don't deserve them necessarily, who haven't worked as hard as other people, and it's simply because of the fact of the race that they are. And that is racism in itself. No matter what color it's against, when you're basing something off of race, that is racism.
So it's basically come back to where it's reverse racism now.
Exactly. That's
If
exactly.
you're white, you don't get in. Spotlight comes too.
Okay, thank you all for your time.
Yeah.